If the president, who regrets not signing that executive order to the then SecDef in 2020, asks you to seize ballots or voting machines in states during the 2026 election, will you stand up for the Constitution and say no, or will you salute and do his bidding? What's happening?
It's yet another gotcha hypothetical, which is your specialty.
It's not a hypothetical. I refuse to accept. You give that answer all the time. You're the guy here in the seat. It's not hypothetical. Tell the American people, will you deploy the uniformed military to our polls to collect voter rolls or machines?
Are you accusing me of performing? Because you're performing for cable news right now.
But what would happen if a president ordered the U.S. military to seize ballots during an American election? When Senator Elissa Slotkin asked Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth that question, the hearing took a dramatic turn.
Gentlemen, you're here to ask for $1.5 trillion, 40% more than what we gave you last year, $1 trillion. And I agree with the chairman of this committee that the world has never been more dangerous and complicated. And regardless of whether we disagree on the reasons for getting into this war, I think we can all agree that we want our military to come out of it safely and successfully and as soon as feasible. The military has taken, the administration has taken military action in 10 different places in the world in 15 months, more than any president in U.S. history. I think President Trump has really become a foreign policy president. And many of those operations, were on the news for a couple of days, but then the American public didn't feel them. And I think the difference with this war with Iran is that the American public is feeling it in their pocketbooks. Gas in Michigan is $4.99 today. The cost of fertilizer, of airline tickets, things that are real to people. Secretary Hegseth, the president said that you were most keen on this war. He said that you were the most gung-ho about it. I think despite us all wanting to come out of this successfully, it is hard to miss that we are at the stalemate, that we don't control the Strait of Hormuz because shipping is not getting through. And we can block what they're trying to get through, but nothing is moving and it's costing the American public. And I think that's a fundamentally different moment than the rest of the military action we've taken. Even in Middle East 101 class, we used to talk about and run war games on the Strait of Hormuz. It's a strategic geography that the Iranians have. And I think it's just concerning to me that we can try and tell the American people that it's going great and we're killing it, but until the Strait of Hormuz is open, I don't think we can credibly say that with any seriousness.
Since this hearing, negotiations involving the U.S., Iran, and regional mediators have continued to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. While shipping traffic has resumed in limited numbers, it remains well below pre-war levels, keeping global energy markets on alert.
I think the question I have for you, though, is future looking, and it's our 2026 elections. The president has been very clear. He said in the State of the Union that essentially if his side doesn't win, then the election was rigged. He said that before the 2020 election. He's asked for voter rolls for 29 different states. He just asked for Detroit's votes or ballots. And we know that in 2020, he wrote an executive order that he didn't sign that said to the U.S. military, to the Secretary of Defense, you should go and seize ballots and voting machines. A few months ago, he said that he regretted that he didn't sign that executive order. So the U.S. military has never been deployed. You incorrectly said yesterday that they were deployed during different elections. Governors deployed them under their authorities, but the federal government has never put the uniformed military at our polls during World War II, right after 9/11. We've never had to do that. So Secretary Hegseth, if the president, who regrets not signing that executive order to the then SecDef in 2020, asks you to seize ballots or voting machines in states during the 2026 election, will you stand up for the Constitution and say no, or will you salute and do his bidding?
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has faced continued congressional questioning over the limits of military authority in domestic matters, with lawmakers repeatedly seeking assurances that the armed forces would act within constitutional and legal boundaries.
Senator, I didn't get a chance to answer the front part of your question, which, there was a lot of deferred maintenance under the Biden administration that needed to be addressed because the world was in chaos when President Trump was elected.
Just address the election issue, please.
Well, again, that's
the most important thing. It's what's happening.
It's yet another gotcha hypothetical, which is your specialty.
It's not. We had
and
an executive order
under the Biden administration in
predecessor had to
2024.
hold. It's not a hypothetical. I refuse to accept. You give that answer all the time. You and I have done this dance before. Get over it, okay? In 2020, he's the president, your boss, the guy you're performing for right now, told the journalists this year that he wished he signed that executive order to your predecessor. And your predecessor said publicly, thank God, we didn't actually go forward with it. What are you going to do? You're the guy here in the seat. It's not hypothetical. Tell the American people, will you deploy the uniformed military to our polls to collect voter rolls or machines?
Are you accusing me of performing? Because you're performing for cable news right now.
But
just
Mr.
answer the
Secretary,
question.
we have
It's a hypothetical. By the way, in 2024, under the Biden administration, 15 states did deploy
Under
troops to
their
polling
governor's
stations.
authority, when their governors asked for it.
What did Joe Biden say about that?
That's fundamentally, I don't think anything, because he needed them for cybersecurity and for COVID. Trump did it too, under Trump. But it was not the federal decision. It was those governors of the states under their authorities, okay? It's never been done in our history. Please stand up for the Constitution. Do not send uniformed military to our polls.
Never been ordered to do anything illegal, and I won't. That
Thank
goes
you
without saying.
In the days immediately following this hearing, the administration continued defending its military campaign while arguing that a ceasefire with Iran effectively paused the 60-day War Powers Act clock and therefore did not require immediate congressional authorization. That legal interpretation was strongly disputed by many lawmakers from both parties who argued Congress should vote before any prolonged military engagement continued. Throughout the summer, both the House and Senate considered multiple war powers resolutions seeking to restrict or terminate U.S. military operations against Iran. Although several Republicans joined Democrats in supporting greater congressional oversight, the Senate narrowly rejected the latest resolution in a 49-50 vote, leaving the administration's military authority unchanged. At the same time, congressional hearings continued examining the administration's strategy, the cost of the conflict, and the absence of a clearly defined end state. The strategic concerns discussed during the hearing also continued to evolve. Despite significant U.S. military operations against Iran, commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remained one of the administration's principal challenges, with shipping disruptions, elevated insurance costs, and energy market volatility continuing for months. President Trump later announced renewed negotiations with Iran, describing them as Tehran's last chance to reach an agreement while emphasizing reopening the strait and preventing Iran from rebuilding its nuclear program. At the same time, lawmakers launched additional investigations into the conduct of the Iran campaign, including whether U.S. forces had been adequately protected after a deadly Iranian drone attack that killed 6 American service members and wounded dozens more. Meanwhile, no evidence emerged that the administration ordered the U.S. military to seize ballots or voting machines during the 2026 election cycle, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth continued stating publicly that he had never been ordered to carry out an illegal directive and would not do so. The hearing itself highlighted 2 very different concerns that ultimately intersected around the question of constitutional responsibility. Senator Elissa Slotkin first focused on the practical consequences of the Iran conflict, arguing that regardless of differing views about how the war began, Americans were now experiencing its economic effects through higher gasoline prices, increased transportation costs, and broader inflationary pressures. Her argument was that military success should not be measured solely by battlefield achievements if ordinary families continue paying the economic price of a prolonged conflict. Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the administration's military strategy by arguing that President Trump inherited a far more unstable international environment and that decisive military action had corrected years of neglected security challenges. From his perspective, the administration's operations had significantly weakened Iran's military capabilities while strengthening American deterrence. Rather than accepting the characterization of strategic stalemate, he maintained that the United States retained the initiative and greater leverage over future events. One of the hearing's most significant moments came when Slotkin shifted away from foreign policy and asked about the military's constitutional role during elections. She referenced President Trump's past comments regarding voting machines and military involvement, arguing that the issue was not hypothetical because similar ideas had previously been discussed within the executive branch. Her central concern was whether the Department of Defense would refuse any future order directing federal military forces to interfere with election administration. Initially, Hegseth criticized the question as another political hypothetical and accused Slotkin of seeking a gotcha moment rather than discussing real military operations. Slotkin rejected that characterization, arguing that Congress has an obligation to examine constitutional questions before, not after, a potential crisis arises. She emphasized the long-standing American tradition that election administration remains primarily a civilian responsibility carried out by state and local governments rather than the federal military. The exchange concluded with Hegseth providing the answer Slotkin had been seeking. Although he declined to engage extensively with the hypothetical scenario, he stated that he had never been ordered to carry out an illegal action and would not do so if such an order were given. That response reaffirmed a long-standing principle within the U.S. military that service members remain bound by the Constitution and are not required to execute unlawful orders. The hearing also reflected broader questions about civilian oversight of the armed forces. Congress routinely examines not only how military operations are conducted abroad, but also how constitutional safeguards are preserved at home. Slotkin's questions illustrated lawmakers' responsibility to clarify the legal limits of executive authority, while Hegseth emphasized confidence in the military's professionalism and adherence to lawful orders. Together, the exchange demonstrated that national security oversight extends beyond battlefield decisions to include the constitutional principles governing the use of military power. Looking back, this hearing became part of the broader congressional debate over the balance between presidential authority, military readiness, and constitutional accountability. Whether discussing military operations in the Middle East or hypothetical domestic scenarios, the exchange underscored that successful national security policy depends not only on operational effectiveness, but also on maintaining public trust, respecting civilian control of the military, and preserving the constitutional boundaries that define the role of America's armed forces.